So here we are, in the aftermath of Mr Darcy's tell-all letter. Crikey, what a revelation! Elizabeth is still fuming at Darcy and wants to dismiss the whole thing as false. Darcy's actions had hurt Jane and ruined her chances of happiness with Bingley. Then again, his account of Wickham's behaviour is persuasive, and Elizabeth can't bring herself to contradict it. And if she's really honest, Darcy is looking like the innocent party here. In the end, Elizabeth is forced to admit that Wickham is a villain, a gold digger hunting for a rich wife. What's worse, she'd openly favoured him. How embarrassing. But how can she believe Darcy regarding Wickham, yet dismiss his reasons for intervening with Bingley and Jane? When Elizabeth reads over that part of the letter again, she realises that Darcy acted out of genuine concern for Bingley. Since Jane is naturally modest and reserved, Darcy didn't believe that she returned Bingley's feelings. Hey team, just a reminder, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It really helps the channel out, and our next upload could be on something taught in your next class. Thanks, and back to the video. But worst of all, Mrs Bennet and her youngest daughters are so ill-mannered that Darcy was compelled to prevent Bingley from marrying into the Bennet family. Elizabeth is mortified, but she can't blame him. She can only feel ashamed. Darcy isn't to blame for Jane's disappointment. Her own family is. When Elizabeth returns to Rosings after her long walk, she learns that Darcy and his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam, have departed. Apparently, Colonel Fitzwilliam had lingered, hoping to catch Elizabeth, but she's glad she missed him. In the week leading up to Elizabeth's departure from Hunsford Parsonage, she often thinks about the letter. She's basically learnt it by heart. When Elizabeth thinks about the way she scolded and condemned Mr Darcy, she feels angry with herself. She's sorry to have hurt his feelings, but she stands by her refusal to marry him. Hopefully, she won't have to see him ever again. But the most depressing thing about this whole debacle is Jane's tragedy. Both Jane and Bingley had genuine feelings for one another, but her family's poor behaviour had ruined everything. There was nothing to be done. On the morning of her departure, Elizabeth breakfasts with Mr Collins. He thanks her profusely for her 6-week visit, but also highlights how he facilitated the great honour of her introduction to Lady Catherine at Rosings. Mr Collins expects Elizabeth to give a positive report of her time at Hunsford and Rosings to folks back home. Could he be more cringy? Elizabeth feels sorry to leave Charlotte with this silly man, but it's clear that Charlotte made her choice with her eyes wide open. She does not seek Elizabeth's pity. The carriage arrives, a few last goodbyes are said, and within a few hours, Elizabeth and Maria reach the Gardiners' house in London. Elizabeth is happy to be reunited with Jane and is eager to tell her everything, from Darcy's proposal to Wickham's villainy. But she thinks better of it. She doesn't trust herself not to mention Bingley, which would upset Jane. Elizabeth, Jane and Maria are soon on their way home to Longbourn and are met at a local inn by Kitty and Lydia. Surprise! Over salad and cold meats, Lydia delivers her exciting news. Wickham no longer has a thing for Mary King. He's single and ready to mingle. And Lydia can barely keep his name out of her mouth for the rest of the afternoon. Back at Longbourn, the Bennets host the Lucases for a big welcome home lunch for Elizabeth, Jane and Maria. Mrs Bennet is glad to see that her eldest is still beautiful, while Mr Bennet is glad to have his favourite daughter back. After lunch, Kitty and Lydia propose a walk to Meryton, obviously to see if there are any officers around, but Lizzie opposes the idea. She dreads seeing Wickham. Frankly, Wickham's regiment can't leave for their next encampment in Brighton soon enough. The problem is, Lydia is campaigning eagerly for a family summer holiday to, guess where? Brighton. Mrs. Bennet approves the scheme and is currently trying to talk Mr. Bennet into it. Having held on to her secrets for 2 weeks, Elizabeth finally opens up to Jane, but she only drops 2 of the 3 bombshells: Darcy's shambolic proposal and her angry refusal, and the fact that Wickham had tried to run off with Darcy's younger sister. Elizabeth stays tight-lipped about Darcy's interference with Jane and Bingley's blossoming love. Jane has such a beautiful, soft heart. She feels sorry for Darcy. She knows how strident Lizzie can be, and is shocked to the core by Wickham's deceit. The 2 sisters decide to keep Wickham's terrible secret. No need to ruin his reputation when his regiment are due to ship out soon. When Elizabeth catches up with her mother, she patiently suffers her mother's bitter complaints. Mrs. Bennet despises Bingley for breaking Jane's heart and resents Mr. and Mrs. Collins, who will inherit Longbourn. These 2 disappointments have driven Mrs. Bennet into constant anxiety about their family's future. Meanwhile, Kitty and Lydia become increasingly gloomy as the date for the militia's departure draws near. But Lydia gets a lucky break when she's invited to accompany the regiment to Brighton as a companion to Mrs. Forster, the Colonel's wife. This delights Mrs. Bennet, devastates Kitty, and worries Elizabeth. She even appeals to her father to stop Lydia from going. Her flirtatious behaviour is bound to disgrace the family. But Mr. Bennet reasons that if Lydia isn't allowed to go, she'll tear the house down. Lydia must go. End of story. Elizabeth finds herself in Wickham's company one last time before his departure to Brighton. He's as charming as ever, but this time she's repulsed rather than flattered. When he inquires about her time at Hunsford and Rosings, Elizabeth makes a point of saying that she'd spent a lot of time with Mr. Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam. On sensing Wickham's alarm, Lizzie adds that she now understands Mr. Darcy much better than before. Wickham can barely contain his anxiety for the rest of the evening, while Lizzie stays cool and enjoys having the upper hand. When the officers finally depart, Elizabeth hopes she'll never see Wickham again. 3 weeks after Lydia's departure to Brighton, Elizabeth is whisked off on a summer holiday of her own. She'll be spending a few weeks with the Gardiners in the picturesque county of Derbyshire. They were meant to be going to the Lakes District, but Mr. Gardiner's business commitments forced them to change plans. This is disappointing for Elizabeth. She was really hoping to bask in the spectacular scenery of the lakes. But her main objection, which she keeps to herself, is that Derbyshire is Mr. Darcy's home county. But surely there's no need for them to visit Pemberley, his grand estate. Is there? Actually, Mrs. Gardiner is keen to visit Pemberley because of its stunning grounds. Oh no! Luckily, when Elizabeth asks discreet questions about whether the owners of Pemberley will be home for the summer, she learns that they'll be elsewhere. Phew! Imagine running into Darcy again so soon. That'd be awkward. But there's no danger of that, so to Pemberley they'll go. Of course, there's no chance that Darcy would just show up, is there? Stay tuned to find out what happens in Volume 3 of Pride and Prejudice. We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.